Hey guys, this is New Sensei. Today I'll be covering a question which I often get in regards to starting archery or moving through archery, and I call this the progression myth. And there are actually two different variations which I'll cover in this video. Many people who start archery have the idea that they have to progress from one kind of bow to another. Typically, it might be starting off with a youth fiberglass bow like this, and once you get the feel for archery, then you move on to something like this or this, and once you become an excellent shot, you can get something like this. This concept of having to go through bows in order and spending enough time to be comfortable and then level up with the bow is kind of perpetuated by some beginners, by parents sometimes, especially with kids who do archery, and sometimes by archery stores. And this idea of stores labeling bows as beginner, intermediate and advanced is kind of arbitrary. It helps buyers because they can see the sort of bow they're looking for, but the bows really aren't that different. It's more about the price point rather than the skill level required. So all these things contribute to the notion of progression, where you have to move through bows in a certain order. There is a legitimate reason why people might follow this train of thought, but for the most part the idea of bows requiring certain skill levels isn't really apparent. I want to quickly touch on the youth fiberglass bows because a lot of parents will think that this will give their child a good indication of whether or not they would like to do archery before buying something more substantial. This might cost around $20 to $50, including a whole set of arrows and equipment, whereas an actual bow will cost around $150. So this might seem to be an economical choice to see if their young child will like archery. And again, from a parenting point of view, this does make some kind of sense. However, the problem with using the youth fiberglass bows, the really cheap ones, as a bellwether or as a benchmark, is that these bows really aren't that good. They're fun backyard bows, but they don't really encourage growth in archery. So somebody might really enjoy just plinking targets in the backyard, but this sort of bow does not give you any sign of accuracy or skill, nor does it give any satisfaction. It is kind of fun to use, I admit. But for the most part, someone who uses a bow like this probably won't progress unless they're really encouraged or have a really good sense of accomplishment by their parents. So you don't need to start with a youth fiberglass bow. That's something which I think is some people will go into early on, but many archers will never use one of these. More to the point though is the idea that you have to advance through these bows before you reach the top level. So in my hands I've got something basic like the OMP Adventure, which is basically Samick Polaris. I have the Samick Sage, which a lot of people know, and I've got the Takedown. Again, there's not much difference between these three bows. I mean, look at them, they're really identical. Their function and handling is exactly the same. You don't require additional skills or experience or expertise to use a high level bow. I mean, it's not like the Samick Sage is a level 10 beginner bow and the Takedown is a level 100 legendary bow, although it kind of is. But the ability to use these bows is not dependent on your ability to use lower level bows, because there isn't really such a thing as a lower level bow. Yes, the price points are entirely different, but their function is the same. So if you think about it, if you just want a bow to shoot, you can get a cheap bow or you can get a really expensive bow. But you don't have to become really good at the Samick Sage in order to buy a Takedown. That's the point I'm making here. Many people have this idea because they want to justify the expense of buying a bow, as well as the risk factor in dropping out of archery. So it's a bit easier when you are buying a relatively cheap bow and then leaving it, not using it, compared to spending $1,000 on a really good bow and then not using it. That feels really bad. But the bows are functionally the same. So you can skip the entire entry-level bows and go straight to your top-level bows. What's the difference? Mostly it's a luxury thing, it's a look thing, it's a feel thing, And most of the time, the top level bows do handle and feel a lot better. So you're shooting with a much smoother bow with better performance, which might mean better speed or better vibration control compared to a low level bow. But both these bows handle just the same. If you can shoot well with a Samick Sage, you can shoot well with a Bear Takedown, and vice versa. The same thing applies to target bows. A lot of people start on a very cheap bow like the SF bows, which are very budget friendly, they look nice and they handle well, and they eventually, after years, will upgrade to a better bow, in this case the Inno Max for example. And this is a natural progression for a lot of archers. But the reasoning is not so much a skill level. While there are some differences, the lower level bows tend to be a little heavier, and that makes it a bit friendlier for new shooters to control the bow, while the high level bows tend to be a bit more balanced and a bit more light sometimes, but it's more about balance and finesse, so there is some difference here. But the high level bows function the same as the low level bows. There's really no difference. The low level bows have the same mountings and bushings and the same functions as a high level bow. There's really no functional difference. The main difference is price point. There is a difference in performance and quality and finish and feel and balance, but the function is the same. So most people who go through the progression line or the linear progression will spend a few years on a cheaper bow, again to feel safe and secure in knowing that they're not wasting money. A lot of people unfortunately will buy the first bow and might use it once or twice and then they won't come back again because other things get in the way. And for that reason, you don't want to lose too much money on buying a bow you won't use. So if you buy a $1,000 riser and a $1,000 set of limbs, that's going to be a big waste of money. On the other hand, if you know you want to do the sport in the long term, then there's nothing wrong with investing in a good riser or a good bow immediately. You can in fact skip the entry level stuff. There's no requirement to become good at this bow to become good at this bow. So that's the premise behind the progression myth. The idea that you need to go through the low level bows before you attempt to use high level bows. There isn't really a difference between low and high level bows. It's mostly cost, and the rest is just luxury branding and manufacturing and so on. If you're serious about performance and the best look and feel, then the high level bows or the high cost bows are guaranteed to be good performers and luxury buys. You will probably never see a bad review of an expensive bow because the quality control is so high, the finish is so good that it's guaranteed to be a safe purchase. And if you buy one straight away or you manage to get one somehow, then it's going to be a good bow. Other bows might not look as good, they might not feel as good, but they function the same. So yeah, like the main limitation is budget in my opinion. So most people would justify spending only what they're comfortable with and will only take the plunge to buy a really high cost bow if they feel like they enjoy the sport enough or they intend to be an archer for a long period of time. But otherwise there's no need to go from one end to the other. The other way the progression myth is shown is through someone shooting target recurve. And the question I often get is, should I start with barebow and then move on to freestyle or Olympic? And that basically means, should I just basically become good at this before I put on stabilisers and sights? I'll say this straight out, the answer is no, you don't have to use barebow before you move on to Olympic freestyle. Most people will, that's because clubs would normally train the beginners with a traditional barebow of some sort. So most people will have some exposure to barebow shooting. But the reality is that you don't need to become good at barebow to use sights and stabilisers. Now people might disagree with me, they'll say that if you only use sights, that means you're handicapped, that means you're using it as a crutch and you're a bad archer overall. This is a fallacy. This depends on your objective as an archer. If you want to be good at all kinds of archery, whether it's recurve, barebow, Olympic style compound, then that's your personal goal. But in terms of judging someone else in terms of their skill level as an archer, that's irrelevant. because archery is very specialized. There are different disciplines in archery, and Olympic freestyle is a different discipline to barebow. Because Olympic freestyle is a specific discipline, then the choice to do so is independent of your skill in barebow. There is no requirement to graduate from this to stabilizers and sights. It's purely a choice. If you want to shoot freestyle, then go to freestyle as soon as you can. The sooner you get used to using stabilizers and sights, the faster you progress in that discipline. If you want to shoot both barebow and freestyle, again, that is your prerogative, and you will advance and enjoy yourself in different ways. But it's not required or even recommended that you go through this first and then go freestyle. Because the specific methods and techniques are slightly different between the two styles, you don't have to become good at one because the skills don't transfer over. The foundations are the same, but you can learn the foundations through that particular discipline rather than learning from one to the next. So that's the progression myth. The idea that barebow leads to Olympic recurve is not a true statement, not in my opinion. It's a choice of diverging disciplines, not a progressive line. If we take a step back and examine all the options, while many people will start with a bow like this is not a prerequisite to shooting a different bow. All the bows you use are divergent choices. They all are parallel to each other. Someone can shoot traditional barebow, Olympic recurve, and compound and progress through all of them at the same time, given they have time and money. While a club might teach you foundation skills with a bow like this, you can bypass this entirely and learn the same foundation skills in your specific discipline. If you choose to shoot Olympic recurve right away, buy your kit, put everything on, and you will learn the basics as you go along and become more specialized sooner. If you choose to do compound shooting, you don't have to learn one of these. While this transfers nicely to compound, you can learn all the skills you need using your compound. To summarize, the idea of progression should be based on your skill as an archer and not what kind of bow or what discipline that you shoot. Your bow and your discipline are independent choices which are not related to your skill as an archer. If you choose to be an Olympic recurve, it doesn't mean you're a bad archer you need to sight. And likewise, you don't need to go through the process of becoming a master barebow shooter to become a compound or Olympic shooter. I think people who have the idea of having to progress are stuck on one of two things. Either it's a confidence factor, where things like sight and stabilizers look very fancy and complicated, so you don't feel confident using them, so you want to shoot barebow first. The second factor is cost, where you're stuck on how much you want to spend, and these things are valid. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but at the same time, as I explained earlier, the choices you make are independent of the skill that you have. You choose what you want to shoot, and that choice can be your bow and your style. Anyway, this is New Sensei, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.